The alarm woke Daewon at 3 in the morning. He rolled out of his narrow bunk and grabbed his datapad before his eyes were fully open. The message was short and direct. Director Hyojin wanted to see him, now. Daewon pulled on his uniform and walked through the empty corridors of Refuge Station Theta 7. The station was massive, bigger than any place he had worked before. It orbited a dead world, far from any populated system. Through the windows he could see the gray planet below, lifeless and cold. This place was meant for creatures that no one else wanted to deal with. He had been here for 2 weeks. They brought him in as a specialist, someone who worked with dangerous animals back on Earth. Bears, tigers, venomous snakes. Things that could kill you if you made one wrong move. The Galactic Conservation Collective needed someone like that. They just never told him why. The director's office was at the center of the station. Hyojin was waiting when he arrived. She was Althorian, with a body like a massive insect covered in smooth blue chitin. Her forearms moved in constant small gestures, a sign of stress in her species. Daewon, thank you for coming so quickly. Her voice came through a translator device on her chest. We have a situation. What kind of situation? Hyojin touched a panel on her desk. A holographic image appeared between them. It showed 3 creatures in a large enclosure. They were about the size of big dogs, but that was where any similarity to Earth animals ended. They had 6 limbs, crystalline fangs that glowed faintly in the low light, and bodies covered in what looked like both fur and scales. Their eyes were too intelligent, too aware. Vrel cubs, Hyojin said. We rescued them 3 months ago from a derelict ship. They are the only juveniles of their species in captivity, perhaps the only juveniles left alive anywhere. Daewon studied the image. The cubs looked thin, their movements sluggish. They're starving. Yes, they refuse to eat. We have tried everything. Remote feeding system. Different types of food, supplements, nothing works. They destroy any automated feeders we install. They attack anyone who tries to approach, even in full protective armor. What about sedation? Too dangerous now. They are too weak. One more failed attempt and we might lose them entirely. Hyojin's arms gestured sharply. Every species on this station is afraid to go near them. Not just afraid. Terrified, it is biological. The Vrel were apex predators on their world. Even their young trigger fear responses in other species. Daewon looked at her. But not in humans. We do not know. Humans are new to the collective. You are classified as Category 5 Deathworlders. Your home planet is considered extremely dangerous by galactic standards. You have high gravity, extreme weather, and an unusual number of predatory species. She paused. You also have a documented tendency to bond with creatures that should kill you. You want me to go in there, I want you to try. You have worked with dangerous animals before. Perhaps you can succeed where others have failed. Daewon looked at the hologram again. The cubs were huddled together in one corner of their enclosure. They looked miserable, scared. He had seen that look before in rescue animals back home. Animals that had been traumatized and did not know how to trust anymore. What happened to their parents? Dead. The ship they were on was attacked by raiders. The adults fought to protect them, but they were outnumbered. By the time our patrol found the ship, only the cubs remained alive. And you put them in isolation. Hyojin's arms moved in what might have been a shrug. It is standard protocol for dangerous species. Separate enclosures. Minimal contact. It is for everyone's safety. Daewon felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen this mistake before. Not everyone understood that some animals needed more than food and water to survive. They needed connection, company. Without it, they simply gave up. I'll do it, he said. But I do it my way. No armor, no weapons, no barriers between me and them. That is suicide. Maybe. But if you're right about humans, maybe it is not. Those cubs are dying because everyone is too afraid to get close to them. Someone has to take the risk. Hyojin was silent for a long moment. Her translator made a soft clicking sound. Finally, she gestured with 2 of her arms. Very well. But we will monitor you constantly. If anything goes wrong, we will flood the enclosure with knockout gas. Fair enough? An hour later, Daewon stood outside the enclosure. Through the transparent wall, he could see the cubs. They were awake now, pacing in slow circles. Their eyes reflected the light like mirrors. Tae-sung, the security chief, stood beside him. He was Grelian, built like a bear that walked on 2 legs. His fur was a deep brown and his claws clicked against the floor as he shifted his weight. This is a bad idea, he said. His translator gave his words a growling quality. Probably, Daewon agreed. They will kill you. They are starving cubs. They barely have the energy to stand. They are Vrel. My people ruled our world for millions of years as apex predators. But even we fear the Vrel. They are something else. Something worse. Daewon looked at him. Then it is good that I am human and do not know any better. He stepped toward the door. Taesung reached out as if to stop him, then pulled his hand back. His fear was obvious. The door opened with a hiss. Daewon walked inside. The door sealed behind him. The smell hit him first. Waste and decay and something sharp that made his eyes water. The enclosure was large but barren. Gray walls, gray floor, a few scattered platforms and a water dispenser in one corner. No enrichment, no comfort, just empty space. The cubs noticed him immediately. They stopped pacing and turned to face him. Their bodies went low, tense. Ready to attack or run, Daewon did not move closer. He walked to the center of the enclosure and sat down. Cross-legged, relaxed. He did not look directly at the cubs. That would be a challenge. Instead, he looked at the floor in front of him and waited. Minutes passed. The cubs did not move. Daewon could feel them watching him, trying to understand what he was. Their breathing was fast and shallow. He kept his own breathing slow and steady. He had learned a long time ago that animals could read fear, not just from smell or body language, but from something deeper, some kind of energy that humans gave off when they were truly afraid. Daewon was not afraid, or if he was, he had buried it so deep that it did not matter. More time passed. His legs started to ache from sitting. He ignored it. One of the cubs moved. Just a step. Then another. It was the smallest of the three with darker markings along its spine. It circled around him, staying several meters away, watching. Daewon kept his eyes on the floor. Kept breathing. Kept being nothing more than a presence in their space. The small cub moved closer. Now it was behind him. He could hear its breathing, smell its scent. Something like copper and ozone. Then he felt weight against his back. The cub had pressed its body against him. Testing. Trying to understand. Daewon did not react. Did not turn. Did not tense. He simply sat there and let the cub explore. After a moment, the cub moved around to his side. Then slowly it lowered itself to the ground and pressed against his leg. In the observation room, Hyojin watched her monitors in silence. Taesung stood beside her, his claws digging into the armrest of his chair. On the screen, a human sat quietly while one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators curled up against him like a lost child. Impossible, Taesung whispered. Hyojin's arms moved in a gesture of wonder. Perhaps, or perhaps humans are exactly what we need. 2 weeks had passed since Daewon first entered the enclosure. Every day he spent 12 hours with the cubs. He learned their sounds, their movements, the way they tilted their heads when they were curious or flattened their ears when they were nervous. The smallest one, the one that first approached him, was the most social. It followed him everywhere, pressing against his legs when it wanted attention. The middle cub was cautious but warming up to him. It would sit nearby during feeding times, watching him with those mirror-bright eyes. The largest cub was still wary. It kept its distance, always watching from across the enclosure. But it no longer showed aggression. That was progress. The cubs were eating now, not much, but enough to keep them alive. Daewon had figured out they would only eat when he was present. He would place the food in their bowls and sit nearby. Eventually, hunger would overcome caution, and they would approach. The station staff watched through cameras, fascinated and disturbed in equal measure. No one could explain how a human could sit calmly with creatures that made their instincts scream danger. On the 15th day, a shuttle arrived at the station. Daewon was in the enclosure when he got the message. Director Hyojin wanted to see him. There was someone new who needed to meet him. He said goodbye to the cubs using the soft clicking sound they seemed to associate with comfort. The smallest one made a sad whining noise as he left. It made his chest ache. In Hyojin's office, 2 new faces waited. One was human, a woman with sharp eyes and a confident posture. The other was Clenthian with blue-green skin that looked wet even though it was dry, and gills that fluttered along the sides of his neck. Daewon, this is Jiwon. She is a xenobiologist specializing in interspecies communication, and this is Byung-ho, our chief medical officer. Jiwon stepped forward and shook his hand. Her grip was firm. I have been watching the footage of your work with the Vrel cubs. It is remarkable. I have never seen anything like it. They are just scared animals, Daewon said. They needed someone who was not afraid of them. But why are you not afraid? Byung-ho asked. His voice bubbled slightly through his translator. Every other species experiences biological fear in the presence of Rel. It is not a choice. It is automatic. I do not know. Maybe humans are different. Ji-won pulled out a datapad and showed him a series of graphs. I have been analyzing the footage. I noticed something interesting. Watch this. She played a video clip. It showed Daewon sitting with the cubs during feeding time. The smallest cub was eating from its bowl. The other two were watching. Look at their body language, Ji-won said. The way they position themselves around you. The way they check in with you before eating. This is not just trust. This is pack behavior. Daewon looked closer. She was right. The cubs were not just comfortable with him. They were treating him like part of their group. The Vrel were classified as solitary predators, Ji-won continued. All of our data suggested they lived and hunted alone. But I think that data was wrong. Or incomplete. She pulled up more footage, this time showing the adult Vrel in other enclosures on the station. They were alone, each in their own space. They looked healthy but lifeless, like they were just waiting to die. We assumed Vrel were solitary because the adults do not react well to each other, Ji-won said. But what if that is because we put them in isolation too early? What if Vrel are actually social animals and isolation is what is killing them? Hyojin's arms moved sharply. That would mean our entire approach has been wrong. Yes, and it would explain why the cubs were dying. They were not just hungry. They were lonely. They needed pack connection, and without it they lost the will to live. Byung-ho made a bubbling sound that might have been agreement, and the human became their pack because he was the only one who could approach without triggering their distress hormones. Ji-won turned to Daewon. You saved them by accident. You gave them what they needed most. Not food, connection. The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Daewon thought about the smallest cub, the way it curled against him at night before he left the enclosure. The way it whined when he walked away. But I cannot stay with them all the time, he said quietly. Eventually I have to leave, sleep, eat. What happens to them then? That is the problem, Ji-won said. They need constant pack presence. But you are only one person, and no other species on this station can overcome their biological fear response. Hyojin was silent for a moment. Then she said, What if we brought more humans? Taesung, who had been standing quietly in the corner, made a sound like a growl. That is a terrible idea. Humans are unpredictable, emotional. Having multiple humans working with the galaxy's most dangerous predators is asking for disaster. Perhaps, Hyojin said, but the alternative is watching the cubs die, and possibly understanding that we have been letting adult Vrel die slowly for years because we did not understand their needs. Taesung said nothing, but his fur bristled with agitation. I support this plan, Ji-won said. If we are going to save these animals, we need to think differently. Humans might be the key. How many humans would we need? Daewon asked. At least 3 more. 4 humans working in rotation could provide near-constant pack presence. It would be exhausting, but it might work. Hyojin touched her control panel. I will put in a request. We can have 3 more human handlers here within 2 weeks. The next days passed in a strange blur. Daewon continued his work with the cubs, but now he watched them differently. He saw the pack behavior Ji-won had pointed out. The way they coordinated their movements. The way they communicated with small sounds and gestures. They were not just surviving anymore. They were starting to thrive. The smallest cub had gained weight. Its coat was shinier. The middle cub was becoming playful, pouncing on shadows and chirping in a way that sounded almost happy. Even the largest cub was changing. It still kept its distance, but sometimes it would bring Daewon things. A piece of torn fabric, a loose bolt from the floor, gifts maybe or test. Daewon always accepted them solemnly, and the large cub would bob its head in what might have been satisfaction. 2 weeks later, the new humans arrived. Daewon met them in the docking bay. There was Sang-mi, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and steady hands. She had worked at a zoo on Earth, rehabilitating big cats. There was Woo Jin, younger and nervous, fresh out of university with degrees in behavioral science. And there was Kyung-soo, older than all of them, with scars on his arms and a gruff manner that reminded Daewon of a grandfather. So you are the one who has been living with baby nightmares, Kyung-soo said by way of greeting. They are not nightmares. They are scared children. Children with crystal teeth and murder claws? Yes. Those two. Sangmi smiled. Do not mind him. He is always like this, but he is good at his job. Over the next week, Daewon introduced the new handlers to the cubs one at a time. Sangmi went first. She moved like water, smooth and calm. The cubs accepted her quickly. Within 3 days, she could sit with them alone. Wu Jin was harder. He was nervous, and the cubs sensed it. They tested him constantly, getting close and then darting away, nipping at his sleeves, making aggressive sounds. But he did not give up. Slowly, they began to accept him. Kyung-soo was different. He treated the cubs like dangerous animals that deserved respect, not fear. He never tried to touch them, never pushed for connection. He simply existed in their space with calm authority. Paradoxically, this earned their trust faster than anything else. 1 month after the new handlers arrived, something incredible happened. All 4 humans were in the enclosure during feeding time. The cubs had eaten their fill and were wandering around the space. Then, without warning, the smallest cub pounced on the middle cub. It was play. True play behavior. They wrestled and tumbled, making sounds that were almost like laughter. The largest cub watched for a moment, then joined in. Daewon felt tears in his eyes. This was the first time any Vrel had been recorded playing. Ever. In the observation room, Jiwon was crying openly. We were so wrong, she whispered. They are not cold killers. They are social creatures who need joy just like everyone else. Hyojin's arms moved in a gesture of wonder. Then we must save them. All of them. The success with the cubs gave Hyojin confidence. If humans could help the juveniles, maybe they could help the adults too. There were 5 adult Vrel on the station, each in their own enclosure. Each one slowly dying from isolation. Jiwon spent weeks analyzing behavior patterns. She watched old footage of the adults looking for signs they had missed. What she found was heartbreaking. The adults showed all the signs of severe psychological trauma, repetitive movements, self-harm behaviors, complete lack of interest in their surroundings. We need to try, she told Daewon. Even if we can only save one of them, we have to try. They chose Vrel 07, an adult female. She was the youngest of the adults, brought to the station 5 years ago after her world was destroyed. She was massive, nearly 3 meters long, with scars across her body from old fights. But her eyes still had a spark that the others lacked. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would introduce Daewon to Vrel 07 slowly, over many weeks. Then, if she accepted him, they would try introducing her to the cubs. The first meeting did not go well. Daewon entered her enclosure the same way he had with the cubs. Calm, quiet, non-threatening. But Vrel 07 was not a cub. She was a fully grown apex predator, and she reacted to his presence with immediate aggression. She charged him. Daewon dropped flat on the ground and did not move. It was a submission posture, something he had seen work with aggressive animals before. Vrel 07 stopped inches from him. She sniffed him, her breath hot and smelling of metal. Then she backed away. In the observation room, Taesung was on his feet, ready to flood the enclosure with gas. But Hyojin held up one hand. Wait, Daewon slowly stood up. He did not look at Vrel 07. He walked to the far side of the enclosure and sat down, just like he had with the cubs. Waiting, Vrel 07 watched him for an hour. Then she turned away and ignored him. It was a start. Over the next 3 weeks, Daewon spent time in Vrel 07's enclosure every day. She never attacked again, but she never approached either. She simply tolerated his presence like he was a piece of furniture. Then one day, everything changed. Daewon was sitting in his usual spot when Vrel 07 made a sound he had never heard before. It was low and rumbling, almost like a purr. She was looking at the door of the enclosure. Daewon turned and saw what she saw. Through the transparent wall, the cubs were visible in the corridor. The handlers were moving them to a larger enclosure, one that could eventually house them with an adult. The cubs saw Vrel 07 and started making excited sounds. Their whole bodies vibrated with energy. Vrel 07 moved closer to the wall. She pressed one clawed hand against it. The cubs pressed against the other side, separated by transparent metal but clearly communicating. Jiwon saw it on the monitors. She immediately called Daewon. They recognize each other. Not personally, but as pack. The cubs need an adult. Vrel 07 needs cubs. We have to try introducing them. It is too dangerous, Taesung said. If she sees them as threats, she will kill them in seconds. We will supervise, Jiwon insisted. All 4 handlers present, ready to intervene. Yojin made the decision. We try. Carefully. The introduction was scheduled for the following week. In that time, they let the Cubs and Vrel-07 see each other through the walls. They seemed to calm each other. The Cubs stopped their anxious pacing. Vrel-07 stopped her repetitive movements. On the day of the introduction, all 4 human handlers were present. Sangmi and Kyungsoo stayed with the Cubs. Daewon and Woojin went with Vrel-07. They would bring the groups together in a large neutral space, a training arena that was usually empty. The Cubs were excited, almost frantic. They kept making high-pitched sounds and circling the handlers. Sangmi kept her hands on the smallest one, calming it with soft touches. Vrel-07 was tense but controlled. She walked beside Daewon like a soldier heading into battle. They entered the arena from opposite sides. The moment the Cubs saw Vrel-07, they ran toward her. Everything happened fast. The Cubs surrounded Vrel-07, chirping and pressing against her. She stood frozen as if she did not know what to do. Then slowly she lowered her massive head and sniffed each cub in turn. The smallest cub climbed onto her back. Vrel-07 made a sound, that same rumbling purr. Her whole body relaxed. Woojin laughed in relief. It worked. It actually worked. Then Woojin made a mistake. He stepped forward, excited, and gestured with both hands raised. It was a harmless human gesture of celebration. But to Vrel-07 it looked like a threat display. She moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One moment she was standing still. The next, she was charging toward Woojin. Kyungsoo saw it happening. He threw himself at Woojin, knocking him aside. Vrel-07's claws raked across Kyungsoo's back instead. The protective vest he wore tore like paper. Blood splattered on the arena floor. Daewon did not think. He ran forward and placed himself between Vrel-07 and the fallen humans. He spread his arms and made a sound, a sharp bark that he had heard the Cubs use when establishing dominance. Vrel-07 stopped. She towered over him, blood on her claws. Her eyes were wild. Daewon did not move, did not back down. He held eye contact and made the sound again. For a long moment nothing happened. The arena was silent except for Kyungsoo's harsh breathing. Then Vrel-07 lowered her head. She made a soft questioning sound, like she was asking what she had done wrong. Daewon slowly reached out and touched her scarred snout. It is okay, he said quietly. Mistake. Just a mistake. Vrel-07 backed away. She returned to the Cubs, who had huddled together in fear. She curled around them protectively, as if trying to make up for the violence. Kyungsoo was rushed to medical. His wounds were serious but not fatal. The vest had saved his life, just barely. He would need weeks of recovery. That night, there was an emergency meeting of the station's leadership council. Representatives from a dozen species joined by HoloLink. Many called for the immediate termination of the human handler program. This proves humans are too reckless, one representative said. They take unnecessary risks. The Vrel are too dangerous, another added. We should euthanize them and end this experiment. Jiwon stood up. With respect, the attack happened because we made an error, not because the program is flawed. Woojin made a gesture that was misread. We have learned from this. It will not happen again. One of your handlers nearly died, the first representative said. But he did not die. And Daewon stopped the attack without weapons, without force. He used social dominance signaling. The Vrel responded to pack hierarchy. This proves our theory is correct. Byung-ho added his support. I have been studying the humans closely. They are simultaneously fragile and dangerous. This duality is unique among sapient species. They can be killed easily, yet they face death without hesitation. This makes them perfect for this work. The debate continued for hours. Finally, a vote was called. By a narrow margin, the program was allowed to continue, but with strict new safety protocols and constant monitoring. In medical, Daewon sat beside Kyungsoo's bed. The older man was bandaged from shoulder to hip, but he was conscious and alert. Stupid thing to do, Kyungsoo muttered. Saving that kid. You saved his life? Maybe. Or maybe I just delayed his death. These creatures are dangerous, Daewon. We cannot forget that. I do not forget. I just choose to see them as more than their danger. Kyungsoo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, No, the Cubs asked about me. Sangmi told me. They noticed I was missing. They care about you. Monsters do not care. Then maybe they are not monsters. 3 days later, Kyung-soo received a message on his datapad. It was from Sang-mi. She had attached a video file. He opened it. The video showed Vrel-07 and the cubs in their shared enclosure. They had been allowed to stay together after the incident. The cubs were sleeping in a pile. Vrel-07 was awake, grooming each one carefully with her tongue. Then the largest cub woke up. It looked around the enclosure, clearly searching for something. It made a questioning sound. Vrel-07 answered with a comforting rumble. But the cub was not comforted. It went to the door of the enclosure and scratched at it, still making that questioning sound. Sang-mi's voice came through the video. "He is asking for you, Kyung-soo. He wants to know where you are." The cub kept scratching at the door, kept calling, until Vrel-07 went to him and gently pulled him back to the sleeping pile. Kyung-soo watched the video 3 times. Then he closed his datapad and stared at the ceiling. "Monsters do not care," he had said, but that cub cared. It noticed he was gone. It missed him. Maybe Daewon was right. Maybe they were not monsters at all. In her office, Hyojin reviewed reports and made difficult decisions. The program would continue. They would be more careful. They would train additional handlers, both human and non-human. Because if they could save the Vrel, they could save other species too. Species that the galaxy had written off as too dangerous, too difficult, too alien to understand, and humans, strange death-world creatures who did not know when to be properly afraid, might be the key to everything. Kyung-soo returned to work after 6 weeks. His back was healed, but the scars would be permanent. He wore them like badges of honor, though he pretended he did not care. The first thing he did was visit the enclosure. The cubs saw him through the transparent wall and went crazy with excitement. They threw themselves against the barrier, making sounds that were almost like crying. Even Vrel-07 reacted. She approached the wall and pressed her head against it, as close to Kyung-soo as she could get. Sang-mi was there, watching. "They have been asking for you every day, especially the big one." Kyung-soo felt something tight in his chest. "I should not have stayed away so long. You were healing. They did not know that. They thought I abandoned them." That afternoon, Kyung-soo went back into the enclosure for the first time since the attack. The cubs swarmed him immediately. The smallest one climbed onto his shoulders. The middle one pressed against his legs. The largest one just sat in front of him and stared as if making sure he was real. Vrel-07 watched from a distance. Then she approached slowly and touched her snout to Kyung-soo's hand. It was as close to an apology as a Vrel could give. "It is okay," Kyung-soo said to her. "Not your fault. We made a mistake. You were just protecting your family." The word slipped out before he realized what he was saying. Family. That was what they had become. Not a project. Not test subjects. Family. While the handlers continued their work, Ji-won published her findings about Vrel social behavior. The paper spread through the scientific community like wildfire. Other stations began reviewing their protocols for social predator species, but not everyone was convinced. The collective sent an evaluator to determine whether the program should continue or be shut down permanently. Her name was Soo-yeon, and she was human. She arrived on a supply ship with minimal warning. Hyojin met her at the docking bay. Soo-yeon was tall and formal, with eyes that missed nothing. "I have reviewed all of the reports," Soo-yeon said as they walked through the station. "Your results are impressive. But so are your risks. A handler nearly died. He saved a colleague's life, and he returned to work. Because humans are reckless. That is not a strength, Director. It is a liability." They reached the observation room overlooking the main enclosure. Inside, all 4 handlers were working with the Vrel. It was feeding time. The cubs were eating while Vrel-07 watched over them. Daewon sat nearby, relaxed and calm. "How do they do it?" Soo-yeon asked quietly. "I am human. I know our psychology. We should be terrified of those creatures. Yet you are not," Hyojin observed. "I am watching through a wall. That is different from being in there with them. Perhaps you should try it." Soo-yeon looked at her sharply. "That was not part of my evaluation plan. Understanding requires experience. You cannot judge this program from outside looking in." Over the next week, Soo-yeon interviewed each handler separately. She wanted to understand their motivations, their fears, their reasons for taking such extreme risks. Sang-mi met her in a small conference room. She answered questions calmly and directly. Why do you do this? Suyon asked. Because they need someone, and I can be that someone. But why you specifically? Why not let another species handle it? Because other species cannot. Their biology prevents it. Humans do not have that limitation, so we have a responsibility. What about the danger? Sangmi smiled. Life is dangerous. I worked with tigers on Earth, bears, crocodiles. I was always one mistake away from death. But that did not make the work less important. These creatures deserve to live. Someone has to help them. Wu Jin was more nervous during his interview. He still had nightmares about the attack. I am terrified most of the time, he admitted. Every time I go into that enclosure, I think about what could go wrong. Then why continue? Because they are not evil. They are just animals trying to survive. Yes, Frel07 attacked, but it was our fault, not hers. We scared her. She reacted. If I give up now, I am saying she is a monster. And she is not. Kyung-soo's interview was the shortest. Why do you do this? Suyon asked. He looked at her like she had asked a stupid question. Someone has to. Might as well be us. That is not a real answer. It is the only answer that matters. Those cubs are alive because we were willing to take the risk. If we had not, they would be dead. That is enough reason. Day 1 was the last interview. They met in the observation room late at night. Below, the Vrel were sleeping in a pile, all 5 of them together. The cubs were tucked against Vrel07's massive body. It looked peaceful. Why do you do this? Suyon asked him. Day 1 was quiet for a long time. Then he said, because someone has to see them as more than what they can do to you. Explain. Everyone looks at the Vrel and sees danger. Teeth, claws, death. But that is not all they are. They are social creatures who need connection. They play. They feel joy and fear and loneliness. If we only see the danger, we miss everything that makes them worth saving. Suyon watched the sleeping Vrel below. You love them. Yes, that is dangerous. Emotional attachment clouds judgment. Maybe. Or maybe it is the only thing that lets us truly understand them. You cannot help something you do not care about. Suyon spent 3 more days observing the handlers at work. She watched training sessions. She reviewed safety protocols. She analyzed incident reports and success metrics. Then she did something unexpected. She asked to enter the enclosure. Hyojin was surprised. That is not necessary for your evaluation. I need to understand what the handlers experience. I cannot judge their decisions without experiencing their reality. Daewon agreed to accompany her. They entered during the afternoon when the Vrel were calm and well-fed. The cubs were playing with a large ball that Sangmi had introduced. Vrel07 was watching them with what looked like maternal pride. Suyon stepped inside and froze. The smell hit her first, then the reality of being in an enclosed space with creatures that could kill her in seconds. Breathe, Daewon said quietly. They can sense fear, but they do not attack because of it. Just breathe. Suyon forced herself to breathe slowly. The cubs noticed them and came over to investigate. The smallest one sniffed her boots. She fought the urge to run. They are curious about you, Daewon said. New pack member. They want to know if you are safe. Am I? They will decide. The middle cub bumped against her leg. Not aggressive. Just testing. Suyon stood very still. The largest cub approached and stared at her. Its eyes were intelligent and calculating. Then it made a soft sound and walked away. Acceptance. You passed, Daewon said with a small smile. Suyon stayed in the enclosure for an hour. By the end, she was sitting on the floor with the smallest cub curled in her lap. Her hands were shaking, but she was smiling. I understand now, she said. This is not about training animals. It is about building relationships. Yes, and humans can do this because we are foolish enough to try. Or brave enough. Depends on how you look at it. That evening, Suyon submitted her report to the collective. She recommended that the program continue with additional safety measures, but she also recommended something else. The handlers should begin training non-human staff. The Vrel could not remain dependent on one species. They needed to learn to trust others. It was slow work. Tae-sung was the first volunteer. His people were natural predators, but even they feared the Vrel. It took months of preparation. Cognitive exercises, exposure therapy, practice sessions where he watched the handlers work. Finally, he was ready to try. He entered the enclosure with Daewon beside him. His whole body was tense. His claws were out, not in aggression but in instinctive defense. The cubs approached cautiously. They could sense his fear. It made them nervous. Taesung forced himself to sit down, forced himself to breathe. He had watched the humans do this dozens of times. He could do it too. The smallest cub came close. It sniffed him. Then it pressed against his leg. Taesung felt tears in his eyes. He had been so afraid for so long. But the cub did not care about his fear. It just wanted connection. "You are doing well," Daewon said quietly. "I am terrified. I know, but you are here anyway. That is what matters." Over the following months, more non-human staff completed the training. Some succeeded. Others could not overcome their biological responses. But the ones who succeeded opened new possibilities. The Vrel were learning to trust multiple species. They were becoming more adaptable, more resilient. And the galaxy was learning that humans, strange creatures from a dangerous world, had something valuable to offer. Not strength, not technology, but the ability to bridge gaps between species that thought they could never connect. 2 years passed. The cubs were no longer cubs. They were adolescents now. Nearly as large as Vrel's 07, their bodies had filled out. Their movements were confident and powerful. They were beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Refuge Station Theta 7 had changed completely. The Vrel enclosures were larger now, enriched with climbing structures and hunting simulations. The population was stable. 5 adults and 3 adolescents, all thriving. More importantly, 3 other stations had adopted the human handler model for their own dangerous species. The collective now recognized humans as bridge species, beings who could connect with creatures that others could not approach. But success brought new challenges. The adolescents were approaching full maturity. Soon they would need to breed to ensure the survival of their species. That meant moving them to a habitat station where they could live more naturally. It meant separation from their human pack. Daewon had known this day would come. He had been preparing for it. But knowing something and accepting it were different things. The habitat station was called Meridian. It was a massive orbital structure that simulated a natural Vrel environment. Kilometers of constructed wilderness complete with prey species, weather systems, and environmental challenges. It was as close to a real world as the collective could create. A team of handlers was already stationed there, both human and non-human. They had trained for months to work with the adolescents. Everything was ready. The transport ship arrived on a cold morning. Daewon helped prepare the adolescents for the journey. They were sedated lightly, just enough to keep them calm during the flight, not enough to impair their awareness. The smallest one, now massive and powerful, pressed its head against Daewon's chest before the sedation took full effect. It made a sound, something between a question and a goodbye. "You're going to be okay," Daewon said quietly. His voice was rough. "You are going to have a real life. Open space, freedom." The other handlers came to say goodbye. Sangmi cried openly. Woo-jin could barely speak. Even Kyung-soo had tears in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. Vrel 07 was not coming with them. She was too old to adapt to a new environment. She would stay on Theta 7. When the adolescents were loaded onto the transport, she threw herself against the walls of her enclosure, making sounds of distress that echoed through the entire station. Taesung, who had become one of her handlers, stayed with her and tried to comfort her. But there was no comfort for losing your family. The journey to Meridian took 3 days. Daewon accompanied the adolescents, monitoring their condition. They were restless during the flight, pacing in their transport pods, calling for their pack. When they arrived at Meridian, the station director met them at the docking bay. Her name was Yoon-suk and she was human. She had visited Theta 7 months ago to learn from the handlers there. "We are ready for them," she said. "The habitat is perfect. Plenty of space, plenty of challenges. They will be happy here." "I know," Daewon said. But he did not sound convinced. They moved the adolescents into a staging area first, a large enclosed space where they could recover from sedation before entering the main habitat. The handlers who would care for them were waiting, nervous and excited. Daewon watched the new handlers work. They were competent, kind, they knew what they were doing, but they were strangers to the adolescents. It would take time to build trust. That evening, Yoon-suk invited Daewon to dinner in the station's small cafeteria. They ate in silence for a while. Then she said, "You do not want to let them go." It is not about what I want. It is about what they need. That does not make it easier. No, it does not. The next morning, it was time. The adolescents had recovered from sedation. They were alert and curious about their surroundings. The entrance to the main habitat was open, waiting. Daewon walked with them to the threshold. Beyond the entrance, he could see endless space. Forests and meadows and rocky outcrops. A stream ran through the center, sparkling in artificial sunlight. He removed their tracking collars one by one. They would be monitored by remote cameras instead. No more restrictions, no more walls. The adolescents looked at the open space, then back at him. They were confused. This was not like the enclosures they knew. Where were the boundaries? Daewon gestured toward the habitat. Go. They did not move. They waited for him to lead like they always had. His heart broke. But he knew what he had to do. He turned and walked back toward the staging area. Away from them, behind him, he heard them follow. But only to the edge of the entrance. They stopped there. The smallest one made a sound, the questioning tone he knew so well. Daewon stopped. He wanted to turn back. Wanted to stay with them. Wanted to walk into that habitat and never leave. But that was not what they needed. They needed to be Vrel, not pets. They needed to be wild. He turned one last time. They were standing at the entrance, three powerful predators watching him with what looked like confusion and hurt. For the first time in 2 years, Daewon let himself cry in front of them. Tears ran down his face. His voice broke when he spoke. You are going to be okay. You are going to have a life. Be free. Then he turned and walked through the staging area door. It sealed behind him with a hiss of hydraulics. Through the cameras, he watched them for hours. They stayed at the entrance for a long time, calling for him. Then slowly they began to explore, first just a few meters, then further. By evening, they had ventured deep into the habitat. Daewon returned to Theta 7 the next day. The station felt empty without the adolescents. Vrel 07 was depressed, barely eating. The human handlers were quiet and sad, but work continued. There were new rescues. A species called Threx, territorial ambush hunters who had been orphaned by a planetary disaster, 6 of them all juveniles, all terrified and aggressive. Same protocol? Sangmi asked. Same protocol, Daewon confirmed. He entered the Threx enclosure alone, sat down, waited, let them decide if he was safe. An hour later, one of them approached and sniffed him. Then it settled against his leg. Some things never changed. 6 months passed. Daewon stayed busy with new rescues. He tried not to think about the adolescents too much. They were living their lives. That was what mattered. Then one morning he received a message from Yoon-suk at Meridian. It was marked urgent. His stomach dropped. Had something gone wrong? He opened the message. There was a video file attached. The video showed the main habitat. The 3 adolescents were there, but they were not alone. 3 younger Vrel were with them. Juveniles that had been rescued after Daewon's departure. The adolescents were teaching them. Showing them how to hunt using the prey simulation systems, demonstrating stalking techniques, being patient when the youngsters made mistakes. But what struck Daewon most was the method. The largest adolescent was working with one struggling youngster. The youngster kept failing to coordinate its limbs during a pounce. Instead of attacking or abandoning it, the adolescent slowed down its own movements, demonstrated the technique step by step, waited while the youngster tried again. It was exactly how the humans had taught them. Yoon-suk's message was simple. They learned from you. Now they are passing it forward. Daewon watched the video 5 times. Each time his chest felt tighter. But it was not sadness. It was something else. Pride. Hope. The adolescents had taken what the humans gave them and made it their own. They were not just surviving. They were building something new. A way of being Vrel that had never existed before. Suyeon sent him a formal letter 2 weeks later. The collective was expanding the bridge species program. Humans were being recruited to work with dangerous predators across the galaxy. Training centers were being established. New protocols were being written. You started something important, she wrote. You proved that connection matters more than fear. That empathy is not weakness. The galaxy is changing because of what you did. In her office, Hyojin reviewed population reports. The Vrel were stable now. Breeding programs were showing promise. Other endangered predator species were being saved using similar methods. She thought about the day she first met Daewon, a human from a dangerous world, offering to walk into an enclosure with creatures that terrified everyone else. She had taken a chance on him, on his species, and it had changed everything. On Earth, recruitment centers were processing applications from people who wanted to join the Bridge Species Program, zookeepers, wildlife rehabilitators, people who had spent their lives working with dangerous animals, people who understood that some creatures just needed someone brave enough to try. At Meridian, the adolescent Vrel continued their work with the younger ones. They were forming a pack structure unlike anything seen in their species before. Mixed ages, shared teaching, cooperative hunting. They were creating a new culture, and they had learned it from humans who refused to see them as monsters. Back on Theta 7, Daewon finished his shift with the Threx juveniles. They were starting to trust him now, starting to play, starting to show the same signs of recovery he had seen in the Vrel cubs 2 years ago. He walked through the station corridors and stopped at Vrel 07's enclosure. She was awake, watching him approach. Since the adolescents left, she had bonded more closely with the remaining adult Vrel. They were not as damaged anymore. They had formed their own small pack. Vrel 07 pressed against the transparent wall. "Daewon,"